I'm joined today by Jen Briney, host of the Congressional Dish podcast, which exposes corporate influence in the bills and laws passed by Congress. And we have a doozy. We talked about this, Jen. I guess it was a couple weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. CISA. We talked about the bill. We talked about the fact that it had passed the Senate. It has still this process through which it may be merged with two other bills. Let's get to the beginning, which is what is in CISA?
So CISA is supposed to be for cybersecurity, for protecting critical infrastructure. That's how it's being sold to us. But the truth is, it's actually about letting any private company in the world transfer information to the United States government and get immunity for doing so. And so the way the bill actually works is it says that they're allowed to send us or send the government cyber threat indicators. But the problem is the definition of cyber threat indicators is so broad that it allows information that is threatened to be taken in a cybersecurity attack, and any information stolen to be transferred to the government. And so, because it's so broad, it can really allow them to get immunity for transferring anything that the government wants.
That's right. In other words, if the company is potentially or ostensibly transferring information that may in some way be connected with this very broad definition, they are essentially not liable as a result of the sharing of that information. And this is actually connecting to TPP in a pretty significant way, which is that the internet, the lack of freedom part of TPP also includes many of these immunities for big corporations with regard to data handling.
Correct. And one of the things that's incredibly disturbing, I haven't read TPP yet, but in this particular bill, there's no protections for our privacy at all. So we're giving lots of protections to companies who are transferring the information. But for us in this bill, we're going to allow the Attorney General, or the bills that it's being merged with, it's random employees of the Department of Homeland Security, will actually write the rules for protecting our privacy. There's nothing in here that actually protects our information at all.
And now that it goes to conference, there's two other bills that CISA may be merged with, and those bills aren't any more pleasing than CISA itself, right?
No, in fact, they're worse because there's parts in all three of these bills that are currently being merged that allow this information that's transferred to the government to be used against us in court. But the bills that CISA is being merged with that pass the House of Representatives allow this information to be used to prosecute all kinds of things like assault, possession of firearms, all kinds of things it can be used for. So that's one of the things that needs to be figured out in conference committee is exactly what happens with this information when it's transferred to the government. But basically, it looks like a blank slate for me that, or not a blank slate, a blank check for the government to use this information in just about any way they want to prosecute us, to investigate us. It's a bad situation.
And you read these bills in detail all the time, and it's very, very common, and we've talked about it on the show before, but talk to us about how common it is that you see bills that could be decoupled, right? There's no rules that say bills A, B, and C have to be voted on yes or no together. And this is really a tool that is misused by our elected officials all the time. And we would be very well served if we could decouple many of these provisions so that we could pass the good and vote down the bad.
That's true. That does happen a lot. But with this particular situation with the cybersecurity bills, they're trying to create a new system for funneling data from the private sector into the government. And so that's really what I'm reading here is a new system is being created. Unfortunately, lots of parts of this are being left up to the agencies. So political appointees are going to do the actual hard work of creating the rules. But right now, what's being discussed in the conference committee, they have to decide who exactly is going to have the different jobs. That was the main difference between the three bills. But the overall system is very similar in all three. The main point is to give immunity to these private companies for turning over data. And all of the details are what's being worked out.
Well, that's sort of nice in a way, at least. This time it's three bills that in the same way are concerning us, and they're not just completely unrelated bills that are being thrown together. But this hasn't happened yet, right? So you've been looking at what can be done now because this conference committee is working on this as we speak, and people can take action on this.
Absolutely, and I hope people do. Because the most effective thing that you can do to stop this bill is to call and email your representative because this bill, because it's being merged, has to be voted on again in both the House and the Senate when they have the final version. And so your representatives need to hear from you if this is not something you want to become law, and they need to hear from you now.
And this is also one of those situations where we saw over the last 2 years a number of bills that contain certain provisions that are included in these new three bills that are now being negotiated in conference together. Fortunately, in part because of the huge activism that there was around cybersecurity bills, many of these provisions did not pass in the past, and now they are here again. What can we say about the desires of our legislators or whoever is influencing them to work on these bills, given that we see some very similar provisions come up time and time again over the last couple of years?
I mean, basically, I think it boils down to they're not giving up, and we are. I mean, we assumed that when CISPA was defeated in 2012,
Right.
that our job was done. But we didn't fire those people. They're still in charge of Congress. And so they keep bringing this stuff back up. And what really concerns me about this one is that all of these bills passed with overwhelming support from both parties in both branches of Congress. So the deck is actually stacked against us unless we get a lot of people to contact Congress right now.
We talk a lot about the differences between Republicans and Democrats. And every once in a while, and this seems to be one of those areas, we actually see broad agreement from the sort of bulk of Democrats and Republicans, usually leaving you with the more libertarian Republicans and the more progressive elected officials within the Democratic Party sort of uniting against this type of bill. So I think these types of bills, and correct me if I'm wrong, are good examples of, number one, the instances where Democrats and Republicans are by and large not very different, and number two, when that libertarian right and the progressive left come together.
You're absolutely right. That's exactly what's going on here. It has more support in the Republican Party than in the Democratic Party, but it still has a ton of support in the Democratic Party. But you're absolutely right. It's the libertarians and the progressives that are merging together, and they're fighting it as best they can, but they need us to back them up because their numbers are just too small right now. They need other people to join them to defeat this bill.
No question about it. We will continue following it. Jen Briney will continue following it as host of the Congressional Dish podcast, which of course exposes corporate influence in the bills and laws passed by Congress. Jen, thanks as always for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.